Today, I'm going to show you how I get podcast reviews on Autopilot. Kind of, right? I have gotten over 44 podcast reviews on one of my podcasts, and this is just one of the podcasts I've been testing this strategy on. Now that I've found that it works, I'm going to test it on the other podcast that I have. So, what am I talking about? What I'm talking about is simple. It's a simple strategy, right? What I use the tool called Rate This Podcast. Now, of course, you can use other tools, right? You don't even have to use tools to do this, but I find that it's easier to just use Rate This Podcast because it makes it seamless. Because this is it. You're asking, right? When you're asking for a review, it's an ask. And for people to fulfill that ask, you want to make sure you reduce every form of possible friction. And so I use Rate This Podcast, and I'll show you why in a bit. Before we get into the Rate This Podcast, at the end of every interview, right, I ask my guest, right, if you could ask your guest at the end of the interview that, wow, we had such a lovely conversation, something like that. And I'd love if you review the podcast on Apple or whatever they listen on, right? You ask them. And most of the time they're going to say, yeah, sure. Some of the time they'll say, oh, great, awesome, right? And when you ask them on the podcast, you they'll say most of the time when I've asked, they've told me yes that they'll review most of the time, like 99% of the time. Then the third thing is after the interview, right? After the interview, you want to send them an email. And what's the email, right? That you're sending them? You're simply thanking them for the interview. You thank them for the interview and you send them a link to rate the podcast. Now I'll show you what that looks like. So if I go to rate this podcast, uh rate this, okay, this podcast.com/relatable. So you see what I'm talking about. You see, you see how simple and clean it is, right? So this is the link of my podcast is called Relatable Zone. So this is my own custom link. So I send them and say, I love if you if you leave a review for my podcast, right? Now, depending on the device they use, right? Right now I'm using a Windows laptop. So it will show me iTunes or Podchaser, right? If I was doing this via my mobile phone, it will show me maybe Spotify or Podchaser. If you're doing this via an Apple device, it will show you Apple Podcast and then other platforms. And then they can then click on their favorite app and leave a review, right? And so seamless. If I was to click on Podchaser, you see, if it will show me the step by step on how to leave a review. Because most of the time, people don't even know what it means to leave a review, right? They have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. But they understand the review concepts, but they've probably never left a review before, maybe. So you want to walk them through. So you say you first tap on rate the podcast button, which you show them, and then fill out the form and tap the save button. And so when I click on write my review to take me to the app. So let's see. So you see Podchaser. Right now I don't have an account. Right? So yeah. What it showed me was first tap on rate this podcast, okay, which is this. Of course, you know how to rate the podcast. You have to create an account, and so pretty much that's it, right? So the leave a review. Now I've had over 44 reviews from all apps. From Apple Podcasts alone, I've had 38 reviews, right? And this is simple. Immediately after the podcast, I send my guest an email to leave a review for me, right? And that's the 38 reviews I've gotten so far. Now I've done over 280 something interviews. Now, the reason why I think this did not work so well is because it was after the interview, a long time after that, I was like asking them, right? So what I'm going to integrate now is immediately once we're doing the interview, whilst we got into the end, I'm going to ask them, I would love if you leave a review for the podcast, right? And then once I ask them, I will send them the message I send them next will be me asking them to leave a review, right? So it's seamless, it's immediate and straight to the point, right? no wasting of time. So so far that's how I've gotten the reviews. So I said it's a three-step process. So this is why I use Rate the Podcast. Currently pay about $9 per month. I'm trying to upgrade my plan to $29. That way I'm able to get what do you call it now? Add 10 podcasts to it, and then I can use it for all my podcasts and make it seamless. So I can get all the social proofs across all platforms. Because since I'm already doing the interviews, I might as well get all the social proof and then probably later on use it. Right. And so you want to use Rate This Podcast, you want to ask guests after interview, and then you want to send them an email. Right. So these are three steps. Right. Now you don't have to use Rate This Podcast, but I find that Rate This Podcast is just seamless, right? Straight to the point and it's easy. Right. Because so that people don't ask you, how do I leave a review? What do I do? Where do I press to leave a review? Right. Yeah, so it's seamless, right? So that's the process. Let me know if you have any questions. If you want to see my template or script, I'll love to share that with you.